The sirens begin at 12:15 a.m. Tokyo sleeps beneath a moonless sky, its wooden neighborhoods pressed together like kindling waiting for a match. In the distance, the low hum grows louder. Not the sharp scream of dive bombers. Something deeper. Something relentless. The sound of 334 engines, synchronized in formation, carrying fire across the Pacific darkness. Major General Seizo Arisu stands in the headquarters bunker, listening to the reports crackling through static-filled radios. His officers speak calmly. They've heard this sound before. American B-29s, the so-called superfortresses, have been flying over Japan for months now, dropping bombs from altitudes so high that interceptors struggle to reach them. Most raids accomplish little. Precision strikes from 30,000 feet scatter across empty fields and industrial outskirts. The Americans waste ordnance. They waste fuel. They waste time. Tonight feels different. The formations are lower. Much lower. 5,000 feet instead of 30,000. The bombers approach not in tight defensive boxes, but in a loose stream, one after another, like a conveyor belt of aluminum and death. Intelligence reports suggest they've stripped out their guns. Removed armor. Sacrificed defense for payload. Arisu doesn't laugh anymore. 3 months ago, when the first B-29s appeared over Tokyo, Japanese newspapers mocked them. Cartoons depicted fat American planes dropping harmless firecrackers. Propaganda films showed confident fighter pilots shooting them down with ease. The public was told these flying fortresses were technological marvels, impressive, certainly, but ultimately ineffective against Japan's disciplined air defenses and dispersed industries. But tonight, the bombers carry something new. Not high-explosive bombs designed to pierce concrete. Not incendiaries scattered randomly across farmland. Tonight, they carry M69 cluster bombs, thousands of them, each containing 47 small cylinders filled with jellied gasoline. Napalm. Designed specifically to ignite wood. To spread fire. To create storms. The first wave crosses the coast at 12:08 a.m. Pathfinders mark the target zones with burning X patterns, visible for miles. Then the second wave arrives. And the third. And the fourth. Each plane releases its payload over a precise grid pattern, transforming geometry into apocalypse. By 12:30 a.m., 16 square miles of Tokyo are burning. The fires don't spread slowly. They explode. Wooden homes ignite in seconds. Flames leap from roof to roof, street to street, block to block. The heat generates wind. The wind feeds the flames. Within minutes, individual fires merge into a single, living entity, a firestorm that consumes oxygen faster than human lungs can breathe. And the bombers keep coming. What changed? How did Japan's confident dismissal transform into defenseless horror? The answer lies not in a single battle, but in the collision of ideology, engineering, and ruthless calculation, a story where the line between strategic necessity and moral catastrophe becomes impossible to draw. The year is 1944. The Pacific War has reached a turning point, but not yet a conclusion. American forces island hop across the Pacific, each captured atoll bringing them closer to Japan's home islands. Saipan falls in July. Tinian and Guam follow. Suddenly, the United States possesses something it has desperately needed since Pearl Harbor: airfields within striking distance of Tokyo. But proximity alone doesn't guarantee victory. Japan remains a fortress. Its cities sprawl across 4 main islands, protected by thousands of anti-aircraft batteries, hundreds of fighter aircraft, and a population indoctrinated to resist invasion at any cost. American planners face a brutal equation. How do you force surrender without sacrificing hundreds of thousands of American lives in a ground invasion? The answer arrives in the form of the B-29 Superfortress. This aircraft represents the culmination of American industrial ambition, the most expensive weapons program of World War II, costing more than the Manhattan Project. Each B-29 costs $639,000, equivalent to over $10 million today. The plane stretches 99 feet long with a 141-foot wingspan. 4 Wright R-3350 engines generate 2,200 horsepower each. Pressurized cabins allow crews to operate at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet. Remote-controlled gun turrets provide 360-degree defensive coverage. Maximum payload, 20,000 pounds of bombs. On paper, the B-29 is invincible. In practice, it's a maintenance nightmare. Engines overheat constantly. Mechanical failures abort half of all missions. Crews call them flying gas stations because fuel consumption rates barely allow round-trip missions even from forward bases. But American doctrine believes in precision bombing, destroying enemy industry systematically, crippling their ability to wage war without targeting civilians. General Haywood Hansel commands the XXI Bomber Command from Saipan. He's a true believer in precision doctrine. His orders are clear: strike aircraft factories, steel mills, and oil refineries during daylight hours from high altitude. The Norden bomb site, America's most guarded secret, supposedly allows bombardiers to drop a bomb in a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. Reality proves less elegant. Japan's weather doesn't cooperate. The jet stream at high altitude, an atmospheric phenomenon American meteorologists barely understand in 1944, creates winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. Bombers fighting headwinds burn fuel at catastrophic rates. Tailwinds push them over targets so fast that bombardiers can't calibrate. Cloud cover obscures targets for weeks. When bombs do fall, they scatter across neighborhoods, hitting everything except intended targets. After 3 months of raids, Hansel's campaign achieves almost nothing. Factories continue producing zeros. Steel mills operate at capacity. Japanese civilians grow confident in their defenses. Propaganda leverages American failure, portraying the B-29s as expensive toys that prove Western technology can't overcome Japanese spirit. In Washington, patience evaporates. The war must end before a Soviet invasion of Manchuria forces political concessions. Before Japanese engineers complete their own atomic research. Before another year of fighting costs another 100,000 American lives. The Joint Chiefs make a decision that will haunt historians for generations. They relieve General Hansel and replace him with Curtis LeMay. LeMay is 38 years old. He doesn't smile. He doesn't make speeches. He doesn't believe in theoretical purity. He believes in results. During the European campaign, he transformed the 8th Air Force from a disorganized collection of bombers into a precision instrument of destruction. He led the first American raid on Berlin. He pioneered formation tactics that maximized defensive firepower. He calculated casualties the way accountants calculate quarterly earnings, necessary data points in service of strategic objectives. When LeMay arrives in the Mariana Islands in January 1945, he conducts a cold assessment. High-altitude precision bombing isn't working. Japanese industry is dispersed throughout residential areas, cottage industries where families assemble aircraft parts in wooden homes. Destroying Japan's war-making capacity means burning those homes. The Norden bomb site is useless in cloud cover and jet streams. His bombers need a new strategy. He finds one in fire. The B-29 Superfortress makes its combat debut on June 5, 1944. 98 bombers launch from bases in India, fly over the Himalayas, the hump, pilots call it, the most dangerous flight path in the world, refuel in China, and strike the Makasan railroad yards in Bangkok, Thailand. It's a modest beginning for the most expensive weapons system America has ever produced. 15 aircraft abort due to mechanical problems. 5 crash. The bombing accuracy is poor. But the mission proves one crucial point. The B-29 can reach targets previously considered untouchable. Japan takes notice. Intelligence reports describe the American bomber in detail. Massive wingspan, pressurized cabin, remote-controlled guns, unprecedented range. Japanese fighter pilots receive new training emphasizing high-altitude interception. Anti-aircraft batteries practice engaging targets above 30,000 feet. Civil defense organizations begin drilling urban populations in fire prevention techniques. But none of these preparations address the fundamental problem. Japan's air defense network is designed to protect against conventional raids, not against an enemy that can strike from altitudes where oxygen starvation affects both pilots and engines, where temperatures drop to 40 degrees below zero, where the jet stream creates wind speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. The first B-29 raid on the Japanese home islands occurs on June 15, 1944. 68 bombers launched from newly captured bases in China attack the steel mills at Yoita on Kyushu Island. Visibility is poor. Only 47 aircraft find the target. One B-29 is lost. The damage is minimal. Japanese newspapers mock the raid as evidence of American desperation, sending precious aircraft on missions that accomplish nothing meaningful. Japanese commanders begin referring to the B-29 raids with contempt. The Americans waste fuel flying bombers across the ocean to drop explosives on empty fields, one officer writes in his diary. They have the technology but lack the strategic intelligence to use it effectively. The contempt is understandable but premature. The early raids are reconnaissance missions disguised as attacks. American planners are learning the weather patterns over Japan, learning the effectiveness of Japanese radar networks, learning how high-altitude jet streams affect bombing accuracy, learning where the defenses are strongest and where they're vulnerable. And they're learning something else, something that will revolutionize the campaign and transform Tokyo into an inferno. High-altitude precision bombing doesn't work against Japanese cities. The jet stream at 30,000 feet creates wind speeds that scatter bomb patterns across miles. Cloud cover obscures targets for weeks at a time. The Norden bomb sight, America's top-secret targeting technology, becomes useless when you can't see the target. Even when bombs hit their designated areas, Japanese industrial production is too dispersed among small workshops embedded in residential neighborhoods. You can't destroy Japan's war-making capacity by hitting factories when most military components are manufactured in thousands of small shops scattered throughout urban areas. The B-29 campaign is failing. By November 1944, after 5 months of operations, the Superfortress has destroyed less than 1% of Japan's industrial capacity. Each raid costs millions of dollars. Each bomber lost represents 70,000 man-hours of production and 11 highly trained crew members. The strategic bombing campaign, the entire justification for the B-29 program, isn't working. Then a Marine Corps general named Curtis LeMay takes command of XXI Bomber Command in January 1945. He's 38 years old, looks like he chews steel, and has a reputation for getting results regardless of orthodoxy. He spent the European campaign developing innovative bomber tactics that reduced losses and increased accuracy. Now he's being asked to salvage a failing strategic campaign with the most expensive weapon system America has ever fielded. LeMay studies the data. He reads intelligence reports. He interviews crews. He examines reconnaissance photographs. And he reaches a conclusion that violates every principle of strategic bombing doctrine. Stop trying to destroy specific factories and start destroying entire cities. Not with explosive bombs. With fire. Japanese cities are constructed primarily of wood and paper, LeMay's intelligence officers report. Residential neighborhoods contain small manufacturing workshops that support military production. Standard high-explosive bombs are ineffective against dispersed targets. But incendiary bombs, clusters that spread jellied gasoline across wide areas, could create firestorms that would destroy not only the workshops but the workers who operate them. It's a strategic concept that blurs the line between military and civilian targets. That line has already been blurred by the German Blitz on London, by Allied raids on Hamburg and Dresden, by Japanese atrocities throughout Asia. But what LeMay is proposing is different in scale and intensity. He's proposing to burn Japan's cities to ash, systematically, methodically, until the nation's capacity to wage war simply ceases to exist. The proposal reaches Washington. Military planners debate the ethics, the effectiveness, the political implications. While they debate, LeMay makes his decision. He strips the defensive guns from his B-29s to increase bomb capacity. He orders crews to fly at 5,000 feet instead of 30,000, below the jet stream, below the worst weather, within range of anti-aircraft fire but too low and too fast for effective interception. He targets Tokyo for the first mission. March 9, 1945. 334 bombers. 2,000 tons of incendiaries. "We're going to burn them out," LeMay tells his crews. "We're going to shorten the war." He doesn't mention the cost. To understand why fire becomes America's weapon of choice, you must understand what Japan has built and how it builds. Japan's military-industrial complex is unlike anything in the Western world. While American and European factories concentrate production in massive facilities, Ford's River Rouge plant, Krupp's steel mills, Boeing's aircraft assembly buildings, Japan distributes manufacturing across tens of thousands of small workshops embedded within residential neighborhoods. A single aircraft engine might require components from 50 different locations scattered throughout Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. Precision ball bearings come from a workshop behind a noodle shop. Electrical components are assembled in a family home's second floor. Optical instruments are ground in a converted Buddhist temple. This distributed system makes Japan's industrial capacity nearly impossible to destroy with conventional strategic bombing. You can flatten an entire city block and eliminate only a fraction of 1% of total production capacity. The workshops simply relocate. Workers return to the rubble and continue manufacturing. There are no choke points, no critical factories whose destruction would cripple entire production chains. American intelligence analysts estimate that 40% of Japan's military production occurs in these small urban workshops. Another 30% occurs in factories deliberately dispersed throughout cities to avoid concentrated bombing. Only 30% of production occurs in facilities that could be considered traditional military-industrial targets. But the workshops and their workers require one thing they cannot relocate: housing. Japanese urban housing in 1945 is constructed almost entirely from wood. Not by choice, but by necessity. Japan lacks the steel, concrete, and stone needed for modern urban construction. Centuries of architectural tradition have refined wooden construction techniques, but those same techniques create maximum vulnerability to fire. Homes are built close together, connected by narrow streets that channel wind and accelerate flame spread. Fire breaks exist, but they're insufficient for the scale of conflagration that incendiary bombing can create. Civil defense preparations are extensive but ultimately inadequate. Every neighborhood has fire brigades. Every family has been trained in fire prevention. Tokyo has conducted regular air raid drills since 1942. Citizens have practiced extinguishing incendiary bombs with water buckets and sand. The government has ordered the creation of fire breaks, cleared areas meant to stop fire from spreading. Thousands of buildings have been demolished to create these gaps. None of these preparations account for what happens when 6 tons of incendiary bombs fall on every square mile of the city simultaneously. When dozens of fires merge into a single firestorm. When the fire creates its own weather system, generating winds exceeding 60 miles per hour that spread flames faster than humans can run. The American military understands this vulnerability because they've tested it. In the Utah desert, the Army has constructed replica Japanese neighborhoods, exact copies down to the furniture, tatami mats, and paper screens. They've bombed these replicas repeatedly with different combinations of incendiary weapons, measuring flame spread, temperature, and destruction patterns. They've determined the optimal mixture of jellied gasoline and magnesium to maximize fire damage. They've calculated the ideal bombing pattern to create overlapping blazes that merge into uncontrollable firestorms. Few people today realize that America built an entire Japanese village in the Utah desert just to learn how to burn it down most efficiently. The tests are classified. The data is restricted. But the results shape everything that will happen over Tokyo. The B-29 itself represents a technological achievement that staggers comprehension. Each aircraft costs $640,000, equivalent to $90 million today. Each requires 15,000 instruments and components. The pressurized cabin is a feat of engineering never before attempted on a production aircraft. The remote-controlled gun turrets use analog computers to calculate bullet trajectory at different altitudes and speeds. The engines generate 2,200 horsepower each, more than any previous aviation engine. But the most revolutionary aspect isn't the technology. It's the production scale. At peak production, American factories are completing a new B-29 every 63 minutes. Assembly lines in Wichita, Renton, Marietta, and Omaha are producing aircraft faster than crews can be trained to fly them. By war's end, nearly 4,000 B-29s will roll off production lines, a bomber force larger than most nations' entire air forces. This production capacity reflects America's fundamental strategic advantage, an industrial base that is geographically invulnerable. While Japanese factories operate under constant threat of air attack, American production facilities are 6,000 miles from the nearest enemy bomber. Workers sleep peacefully. Assembly lines run 3 shifts without interruption. Supply chains function without disruption. The disparity isn't just in technology, it's in the freedom to produce without fear. Japan's leaders understand they're losing the production war, but convince themselves that fighting spirit can compensate for material disadvantage. The Americans have machines, one general argues, but we have the Yamato spirit, the warrior soul that cannot be measured in tons of steel or numbers of aircraft. It's a philosophy rooted in Bushido tradition, in centuries of samurai culture, in the belief that moral superiority can overcome material inferiority. It's also a philosophy about to be tested against 2,000 tons of jellied gasoline delivered by 334 bombers flown by men who don't question orders, don't debate philosophy, and don't distinguish between warrior spirit and burning flesh. The test begins after midnight on March 10, 1945. Tokyo has 3 hours left before it becomes something historians will struggle to categorize. Not quite a battle, not quite a massacre, but something between them, a mechanized apocalypse where the weapon is fire and the target is an entire city's ability to exist. The first B-29 crosses Tokyo's coastline at 12:08 a.m. on March 10. It's a Pathfinder aircraft, flying alone, carrying no bombs, only photo flash cartridges and highly trained navigators. Their mission is simple: mark the target zone for the main force following 15 minutes behind. They drop M-47 incendiary bombs in an X pattern across the densest residential districts of eastern Tokyo. The bombs ignite immediately, creating blazing reference points visible for 50 miles. Within minutes, 334 bombers are vectoring toward those flames. Major General Curtis LeMay watches from Guam, 7 hours away by air, unable to do anything but wait for reconnaissance reports. He has gambled everything on this mission. He stripped defensive guns from his bombers, sacrificing crew safety for bomb capacity. He's ordered low-altitude attacks, exposing his aircraft to anti-aircraft fire. He's abandoned precision targeting for area bombing, what critics will later call terror bombing, what defenders will call strategic necessity. If the mission fails, if losses exceed 15%, if the bombing proves ineffective, LeMay's career ends. More importantly, the entire strategic bombing campaign against Japan faces cancellation. The B-29 program will be judged a failed experiment. Ground invasion of Japan becomes inevitable. Casualty projections for that invasion suggest 1 million American dead. Everything depends on the next 6 hours. The bomber stream approaches Tokyo from multiple directions, denying Japanese defenders concentrated targets. Anti-aircraft fire erupts across the city, a spectacular display that accomplishes little. The guns were positioned and calibrated for high-altitude attacks. At 5,000 feet, in darkness, with bombers approaching from unpredictable vectors, the gunners are firing blind. They hit clouds. They hit other anti-aircraft positions. They rarely hit B-29s. Japanese night fighters scramble but face impossible physics. The B-29 cruises at 230 miles per hour at low altitude, faster than most Japanese fighters can fly at that height. The fighters that do intercept struggle with targeting. No searchlights can track bombers moving that fast. Pilots attempt visual interception but lose their targets against the ground clutter of a city already burning. The first wave of bombers releases its payload at 12:15 a.m. M-69 incendiary clusters, each containing 48 jellied gasoline bombs, separate at altitude and shower across entire neighborhoods. Each bomb weighs 6 pounds. Each ignites on impact with a small explosive charge that sprays flaming gel across a 30-foot radius. Each burns at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt glass, to instantly ignite wood, to cause fourth-degree burns on exposed skin from 20 feet away. One B-29 carries 1,800 individual incendiary bombs. 334 bombers carry over 600,000 individual fire sources. They fall on 16 square miles containing approximately 750,000 people. The density is inhuman, 48,000 people per square mile, compared to 24,000 in Manhattan, 15,000 in London. Families sleep in homes separated by gaps barely wide enough for a single person to walk through. The fires spread faster than comprehension. Within 15 minutes, individual blazes merge into neighborhood conflagrations. Within 30 minutes, those conflagrations merge into district-wide firestorms. Within an hour, the fire creates its own weather system. Superheated air rises so rapidly it creates a low-pressure zone that sucks in cooler air from the perimeter at hurricane speeds. The winds feed oxygen to the flames, increasing temperatures, accelerating the destruction. The fire becomes self-perpetuating, a thermal engine that consumes everything flammable within its reach. Residents who practiced air raid drills discover their preparations are useless. Water buckets evaporate before reaching flames. Fire breaks designed to stop conventional fires are overleaped by embers carried on 60-mile-per-hour winds. Shelters become ovens. Canals become boiling cauldrons. The Sumida River, Tokyo's main waterway and designated refuge area, fills with thousands of people seeking safety from flames. Many drown. Others die from thermal injuries caused by heat radiating across the water. Some survive by submerging repeatedly, surfacing only to breathe, for 6 continuous hours until the firestorm exhausts its fuel. Captain Robert Morgan, piloting one of the B-29s, later writes, "The heat was so intense that it bounced our aircraft up and down like ping-pong balls. We were at 5,000 feet and could feel the updrafts. The smoke was so thick we couldn't see the ground. The smell came through our oxygen masks, burning wood, burning cloth, burning flesh. We were supposed to take reconnaissance photographs, but there was nothing to photograph except smoke and fire. The entire city had become one massive flame." At 3:30 a.m., the last bomber releases its payload and turns toward home. Behind them, Tokyo burns with an intensity visible to American submarines surfacing 150 miles offshore. The fire is so bright it creates false dawn. Smoke rises 30,000 feet, higher than the original bombing altitude. By sunrise, the death toll exceeds 100,000. 1 million people are homeless. 16 square miles of Tokyo have ceased to exist. The firestorm burns for 3 days. And Curtis LeMay is already planning the next raid. Tokyo burns again on May 23rd, and May 25th, and again on May 29th. Each raid follows the same pattern. Pathfinders mark the target. The main force follows at low altitude. Incendiaries fall like rain. Firestorms erupt. Thousands die. The city contracts. Between raids, survivors dig through rubble. They search for family members. They cremate bodies in mass pyres. They evacuate children to rural areas. They rebuild with whatever materials remain. Then the sirens sound again and the sky fills with bombers and the fire returns. But Tokyo is just the beginning. The strategic bombing campaign expands across Japan with industrial precision. Nagoya burns on March 11th, 2 nights after Tokyo. Osaka burns on March 13th. Kobe burns on March 16th. The pace is relentless. Systematic. Mechanical. Every major Japanese city becomes a target. Every urban center containing military production capacity receives the same treatment: pathfinders, incendiaries, firestorms. American intelligence analysts develop target lists ranking cities by industrial importance. Yokohama, Kawasaki, Toyama, Nagaoka. 67 cities qualify for incendiary raids. Planners calculate bomb tonnage required to destroy each city's urban core. They estimate civilian casualties with the same detachment used to calculate fuel consumption. They schedule raids with logistical efficiency, maximum destruction, minimum turnaround time, optimal resource utilization. The B-29 crews fly mission after mission. Some pilots complete 30 raids. 40. 50. They develop routines. Check instruments. Review target maps. Board aircraft. Fly 7 hours. Drop bombs. Fly 7 hours back. Debrief. Sleep. Repeat. The psychological distance between dropping incendiaries from 5,000 feet and the human consequences below becomes absolute. They see fires but not people. Smoke but not suffering. Statistical targets, but not mothers clutching children in canals. Some crew members break under the cognitive dissonance. They request transfers. They refuse missions. They develop psychosomatic illnesses that ground them. But most adapt. They develop what psychologists will later call moral disengagement, the ability to perform actions that contradict personal ethics by reframing those actions as military necessity, as following orders, as shortening the war and ultimately saving lives. Japanese air defense deteriorates with each raid. Fighter pilots grow increasingly desperate. Some attempt ramming attacks, deliberately crashing their aircraft into B-29s. Most fail. The B-29 is too fast, too maneuverable, too well defended even with guns removed. Japanese pilots flying obsolete aircraft with minimal fuel, minimal ammunition, and minimal training cannot stop the bombers. The pilots know this. They fly anyway. They die anyway. Their sacrifice accomplishes nothing except adding their names to casualty lists. Anti-aircraft ammunition runs low. Shells that miss, and most miss, are wasted. Japan lacks the industrial capacity to replace them quickly. Battery commanders receive orders to conserve ammunition for raids on high-value targets. But every raid seems high value when your city is burning. Gunners fire anyway. They watch their shells explode harmlessly in empty sky. They reload. They fire again. They accomplish nothing except making noise while their cities turn to ash. By June 1945, Curtis LeMay faces an unexpected problem. He's running out of targets. 60 cities have been substantially destroyed. Most urban centers containing military production capacity have been burned. Reconnaissance photographs show vast areas of Japanese cities reduced to ash and rubble. Intelligence estimates suggest Japan's war production capacity has declined by 70%. Yet the war continues. Japanese military leadership shows no indication of surrender. LeMay receives authorization to expand targeting parameters. Cities with populations below 100,000, previously considered too small for strategic importance, are now designated targets. Coastal towns. Regional manufacturing centers. Any urban area with railway connections or port facilities. The target list grows to include virtually every Japanese city except a handful reserved for potential atomic bombing and several cities containing large prisoner of war camps. The bombing intensifies. Multiple cities burn on the same night. B-29 formations split into separate strike packages hitting 4, 5, 6 targets simultaneously. Japanese civil defense organizations stop responding effectively. Fire brigades abandon burning neighborhoods as unsavable. Civilians stop evacuating to designated shelters. They've learned that shelters become death traps in firestorms. People flee cities entirely, streaming into rural areas where food is scarce and shelter scarcer. Japanese industrial production collapses. Not from destroyed factories alone, but from the disintegration of the workforce. Workers cannot manufacture military components when their homes have burned, their families are displaced, their cities are unlivable. Supply chains break down. Transportation networks cease functioning. The distributed manufacturing system that made Japan's industrial capacity so resilient against precision bombing proves catastrophically vulnerable to area firebombing. You cannot disperse production across urban neighborhoods when those neighborhoods no longer exist. By early August, Japan's cities are ruins. Over 400,000 civilians are dead from bombing alone. Millions are homeless. Food distribution has collapsed. Starvation looms. The war-making capacity that sustained 3 years of Pacific conquest has been systematically incinerated. And then, on August 6th, a single B-29 drops a single bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another B-29 drops another bomb on Nagasaki. The atomic bombs kill 200,000 people, but they're not what forces Japan's surrender. They're simply the exclamation point on a sentence already written in fire. Japan announces surrender on August 15, 1945. The B-29 campaign ends. The engines shut down. The fires die. Silence returns. But the questions remain. The immediate aftermath is ash and silence. American occupation forces arrive in August and September to find cities that barely resemble cities. In Tokyo, 16 square miles of urban landscape have been erased. buildings reduced to foundations, streets recognizable only by their absence of rubble, survivors living in makeshift shelters constructed from salvaged metal sheets and burned timber, children who don't remember what their neighborhoods looked like before the fires. The human cost is staggering but imprecise. Japanese records were destroyed in the bombing. Many victims were incinerated completely, leaving no remains to count. Families were obliterated with no one surviving to report them missing. Conservative estimates suggest 330,000 Japanese civilians died in the B-29 incendiary raids. Some historians argue the real number approaches 500,000. No one knows with certainty. No one can know. The moral calculus that justified the bombing begins to fracture immediately. Curtis LeMay himself acknowledges the ambiguity. "I suppose if I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal." Every soldier thinks something of the moral aspects of what he is doing. But all war is immoral, and if you let that bother you, you're not a good soldier. It's a statement that reveals everything and resolves nothing. Was the strategic bombing campaign against Japanese cities justified by the outcome? Did it shorten the war? Did it save lives? American lives certainly, but also Japanese lives that would have been lost in a ground invasion? Or was it simply the mechanization of atrocity, the industrial application of fire against civilian populations who had no meaningful ability to resist? The questions haunt historians, ethicists, and military strategists for decades. The bombing of Japanese cities becomes a case study in the moral complexity of total war. That modern conflict between industrial nations recognizes no distinction between combatant and civilian, between military and economic targets, between soldiers and the factories, homes, and families that support them. Some argue the bombing was necessary. Japan's military leadership had demonstrated fanatical commitment to continued resistance. Invasion projections suggested catastrophic casualties. The incendiary campaign destroyed Japan's capacity to wage war without requiring American soldiers to fight house to house through every city. By this logic, the bombing was the lesser evil, horrible but justified by the alternatives. Others argue the bombing was criminal. That deliberately targeting civilian populations with weapons designed to maximize deaths violates fundamental principles of warfare. That Japan was already defeated by August 1945, its navy destroyed, its air force depleted, its cities under blockade. That the bombing campaign crossed ethical boundaries that no military necessity can justify. Both perspectives contain truth. Both miss something essential. The strategic bombing of Japan represents a transformation in warfare that makes traditional moral frameworks inadequate. When technology enables the destruction of entire cities in single nights, when civilian populations become legitimate targets because they support military production, when victory requires not just defeating enemy armies but destroying enemy capacity to sustain those armies, the old distinctions collapse. The survivors carry consequences that statistics cannot measure. Orphans whose parents died in the firestorms. Mothers who lost children. Workers who watched their cities burn. The psychological trauma of living through repeated firebombing raids, the sirens, the wait in shelters, the emergence into transformed landscapes, the search for missing loved ones, the mass cremations, the temporary normalization before the next raid comes. Japanese society rebuilds with remarkable resilience. Within 5 years, Tokyo's population exceeds its pre-war peak. Within 10 years, Japanese industrial production surpasses wartime levels. Within 20 years, Japan becomes an economic superpower. The physical destruction is erased by reconstruction. But the memory remains, encoded in survivor testimonies, in commemorative monuments, in annual ceremonies marking the dates when cities burned. American memory of the bombing campaign is more ambiguous and less examined. The atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki dominate public consciousness, debated endlessly in classrooms and documentaries. But the incendiary raids that killed more people receive less attention. They're harder to categorize. They lack the dramatic singularity of nuclear weapons. They're operations rather than events, systematic, repeated, dispersed across dozens of cities and months of campaigning. Yet the strategic bombing campaign against Japan represents a turning point in human capacity for destruction. It demonstrates that modern industrial nations can destroy enemy civilian populations from the air faster than armies can conquer territory on the ground. It establishes precedents that shape Cold War nuclear strategy and contemporary debates about aerial warfare. It proves that distance offers no protection when technology can project power across oceans. The fires burned for days. The smoke drifted for weeks. The consequences ripple still. History remembers the B-29 primarily as the aircraft that dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That memory is incomplete. The B-29's true legacy is not nuclear, it's incendiary. It's the systematic destruction of 67 Japanese cities using conventional weapons applied with industrial precision. It's the transformation of strategic bombing from a theory about targeting enemy production into a practice of destroying entire urban populations. It's the proof that modern warfare recognizes no sanctuary, no safety, no distance sufficient to protect civilian populations from mechanized destruction. The men who flew those missions were not monsters. They were farm boys from Iowa, mechanics from Detroit, college students from California who enlisted after Pearl Harbor. They followed orders. They executed missions. They believed, most of them, that their actions would shorten the war and ultimately save lives. They suffered fear, exhaustion, loss of friends, and psychological burdens that many carried silently for decades. The men who planned those missions were not war criminals. They were strategic thinkers facing an enemy that had demonstrated fanatical resistance, that had brutalized civilian populations across Asia, that showed no indication of surrender despite military defeat. They calculated costs and benefits. They chose what they believed was the lesser evil. They were proven correct about the outcome. Japan surrendered, but that doesn't resolve the moral complexity of the methods. The truth about the strategic bombing campaign against Japan is that it exists in a moral space where traditional concepts of right and wrong provide insufficient guidance. It was simultaneously justified and horrifying, necessary and excessive, successful and tragic. It saved lives and took lives. It ended a war and established precedents that haunt military ethics still. What the campaign demonstrates, what every student of history and warfare must understand, is that technological capability outpaces moral frameworks. The ability to firebomb cities emerged faster than the ethical language needed to evaluate when and whether such capability should be used. We developed bombers capable of incinerating entire cities before we developed the wisdom to know when incineration serves justice and when it serves only destruction. This remains relevant today. Modern warfare continues to grapple with questions the B-29 campaign first raised. When does strategic necessity justify civilian casualties? How do we measure proportionality when weapons can destroy entire cities? What moral obligations do nations have when they possess overwhelming technological advantages? The precision-guided munitions, drone strikes, and cyber warfare of the 21st century are descendants of strategic bombing doctrine refined over Japan in 1945. The Japanese people who survived the firebombing campaign carry memories that resist simplification. Some harbor resentment. Some express understanding. Most carry both, acknowledging the horror of what they endured while recognizing the historical context that produced it. They remember not as victims seeking vengeance, but as witnesses testifying to what war becomes when industrial societies commit fully to each other's destruction. The American veterans who flew those missions rarely spoke about them. When they did, their words carried ambivalence, pride in their service mixed with discomfort about the methods, satisfaction at contributing to victory shadowed by memories of cities burning below. They were young men given terrible responsibility in terrible circumstances. They deserve neither demonization nor unqualified praise. They deserve what all who participate in history's darkest chapters deserve: honest examination of their actions within their context. The B-29 campaign against Japan was not unique in its moral complexity. Dresden burned. Hamburg burned. London burned. Nanjing burned. Warsaw burned. Stalingrad burned. The Second World War was a conflict where every major participant abandoned restraint, where civilian populations became targets, where the distinction between combatant and non-combatant dissolved under pressure of total war. The firebombing of Japan was part of this pattern, neither more nor less morally defensible than other campaigns, distinguished primarily by its scale and effectiveness. What makes the campaign worth remembering is not its uniqueness but its clarity. It strips away ambiguity about what strategic bombing means in practice. It demonstrates that theories about precision targeting and surgical strikes evaporate when faced with the realities of weather, technology limitations, and dispersed industrial capacity. It proves that modern warfare's logic drives toward extremes, that once nations commit to destroying enemy capacity to wage war, the path leads inevitably toward targeting the populations that sustain that capacity. The fires that consumed Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, and 64 other Japanese cities burned for days but cast shadows that stretch across decades. They illuminate questions every generation must answer. What means are justified by necessary ends? How do we weigh enemies' suffering against our own casualties? When does victory achieved through overwhelming force become indistinguishable from atrocity? Where is the line between strategic necessity and moral collapse? There are no comfortable answers. There are only choices made by imperfect people in impossible circumstances, consequences that outlive those who created them, and obligations for those who come after to remember honestly what was done and why. If you've stayed with this story to its end, you understand that history is not a collection of heroes and villains, but a record of human beings navigating moral complexity with incomplete information and imperfect judgment. The men who flew the B-29s, the commanders who ordered the missions, the civilians who endured the fires, all were caught in circumstances larger than themselves, making choices that seemed right or necessary or unavoidable in moments of crisis. We honor them not by declaring their actions definitively right or wrong, but by refusing to forget what happened and what it cost. By preserving the memory of cities that burned. By acknowledging the complexity of decisions made in war's crucible. By carrying forward the obligation to ask difficult questions about power, technology, and moral responsibility. The engines are silent now. The bombers rest in museums. The cities have been rebuilt. But the questions remain, waiting for each new generation to answer them in their own time, with their own technologies of destruction, facing their own impossible choices. Remember what fire can do. Remember what necessity can justify. Remember what victory can cost. And remember that the hardest truths are the ones that resist simple telling, the stories where everyone was right and everyone was wrong, where the outcome was necessary and the method was terrible, where we saved lives by taking them and ended war by perfecting its practice. These are the truths that history preserves not to provide answers, but to ensure we never stop asking questions. The sky over Tokyo is clear now. The night is silent. The fires are long extinguished. But their light still burns, illuminating paths we'd rather not see and truths we cannot afford to forget.